A warm South African sawubona, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another exciting SIMM webinar. A Chief Engineer in the Pyrometallurgy Division at Mintek, and I'm standing in for the chairperson of the webinar, Isabel Geldenese, who unfortunately couldn't host this webinar due to other commitments. We have two speakers for today's webinar. Firstly, Tamsyn Grewar, a senior scientist in the Biotechnology Division at Mintek. She holds an MSc from Rhodes University. Her research focus over the last few years has been on the development of green technologies relating to the water, energy, food nexus, and developing technologies for the treatment and beneficiation of various mining wastes. Other R&D experience covers a variety of topics, including bioleaching for the treatment of low-grade ores and concentrates, the treatment of mine-impacted water by biological sulphate reduction, as well as investigating opportunities for the reuse of treated water within the water energy food nexus. The second speaker for this morning is Kerri, also a senior scientist in the Biotechnology Division at Mintek. She graduated with an MSc in engineering from the University of the Witwatersrand. She has 6 years of experience in environmental management, as well as 6 years of experience in anaerobic digestion and wastewater research. She is currently working on Mintek's flagship research project on biological treatment of acid mine drainage and has presented at a number of local and international conferences. Today's topic, ladies and gentlemen, is quite close to my heart. Acid mine drainage is one of the largest environmental threats facing the world today, rated second only to global warming. South Africa has a severe and persistent problem of acid mine drainage decant from mines post-closure, particularly in the Witwatersrand and Emalahleni. Series of presentations scheduled for today and Friday will give an overview of the severity and complexity of water-related challenges in a water-stressed nation such as South Africa, as well as a treatment technology that the Mintek's Biotechnology Division has been developing, namely closure. So over to you, ladies, and looking forward to an inspiring presentation. And Tamsyn will get going.
Thank you for that introduction, Buhle. Hello, everyone. I hope you can all see my slides. My name is Tamsyn Grewar. Thank you for joining me today for the first part of a two-part series on Mintek's closure technology for the treatment of mine-impacted water after mine closure. Mine-impacted water is a blanket term that we use to refer to all water, including acid mine drainage and acid rock drainage that has been affected by mining activities. So I'm going to be using those terms interchangeably this morning. In today's webinar, I'm going to be focusing on setting the scene by exploring the various sustainability issues surrounding mine closure. Later on this week, in part 2, my colleague Kerri will go into more detail on the process itself and the evolution of its development. So let's see if we can start. So we start at the beginning. Mining has been central to South Africa's economic. As an industry, it currently contributes around 8% to our GDP and employs approximately 450,000 people directly, many more indirectly. Recent statistics, however, indicate that the average number of dependents for every miner is around 5 or so people. This equates to at least 2 million South Africans that are directly dependent on the mining sector. So this is an important number that I want you all to keep in mind, because we usually only focus on the number of people employed in an industry, when we really should be thinking in broader on an industry. Mining has a somewhat complicated history in South Africa, now more so than ever. On one hand, mining has been a significant driver of our economy, but on the other, a history of poor regulation enforcement has left our country with a legacy of uninhabitable land and highly polluted acid mine drainage. The impacts of acid mine drainage are severe, most notably due to various hazardous components, including acid, sulphate, and metals. However, regulations are becoming more stringent, with codes of practice regularly coming into effect, and this is making it more difficult for those responsible to shrug off their duties. Unfortunately, because mineral resources are finite, many mines are reaching end of life, with mine closures becoming imminent. There are such as the MPRDA and the Mining Charter that are placing pressure on mines to work towards more sustainable outcomes once operations cease. Unfortunately, this legislation is currently limited and seems to focus primarily on mineland rehabilitation as the primary goal. Even pollution and water management seem to have taken a backseat with only minimal requirements legislated. But one of the most glaring omissions is that the regulations as they stand don't take into account the real socio-economic impacts that mine closure with such a narrow focus will have on local communities. Some of the major impacts will include health concerns, environmental degradation, and loss of employment. Going into these a little bit more deeply, with health, many local communities are using and consuming water contaminated by either untreated or insufficiently treated mine-impacted water. Children also play and swim in this water, which could potentially result in serious and long-term consequences for health. Mining pollution is also contaminating natural water bodies, which destroys ecological areas and eradicates wildlife. Currently, a number of protected areas, such as game reserves and wetland sites, are at risk, and the Kruger National Park is one of these. And finally, when mines close down and unavoidable job losses occur, this will not only leave miners without work, but we must remember all of those people who depend on them will also be left behind. These are the uncomfortable realities that we as the mining community need to actively engage, because unfortunately, the current focus on the rehabilitation of mineland post-closure is not going to properly address these serious social side effects. So what can we do? Well, we need to manage mine closure in a more future-focused, sustainable way, with the emphasis moving away from simply rehabilitating mineland, but rather towards being more socially conscious and responsible. As an example, if the focus of mine closure began to shift towards rehabilitating the economy of the area, say from mining to something else, then perhaps we may start to see the scale tip in the right direction. But identifying and successfully implementing sustainable solutions is clearly not going to be a simple task. It is going to take some seriously creative thinking and significant subsidized investment from all stakeholders involved. And I know that's not what a lot of people want to hear. Okay, so I've been throwing the word sustainable around quite a bit, but what does a sustainable solution actually call for? Essentially, a truly sustainable solution needs to address the triple bottom line or sustainability triad of society, the environment, and the economy. We've addressed the needs of society. So let's take a look at the environment with a focus on AMD. Currently, South Africa does not have a commercially available, sustainable solution for the treatment of AMD. There are a number of treatment options out there, although very few are available on a commercial scale. Unfortunately, many new promising entrants are often not able to gain entry to a traditionally risk-averse market because the so-called tried and tested technologies are being touted as the only viable, cost-effective options, with the emphasis being on cost. Personally, I don't believe that there'll ever be a single solution to the AMD crisis, and I know I'm not alone in this. But we can't maintain the status quo where in most, if not all cases, the tried and tested methods are just not sustainable or even very effective. Fortunately, the tide appears to be changing, and there is renewed drive in South Africa towards more sustainable practices. Various industries, guided by a newly invigorated government, are becoming more regulated and held to higher standards than before. Because of this, some are proactively looking at innovative ways of sharing resources, including two of the largest combined water users in South Africa, namely mining and irrigation. And in a drought-stricken country like South Africa, a strategic marriage of these two industries, at least in part, can't happen soon enough. But I know many of you will look at this graph and say, but look how small the percentage attributed to mining is. It's only 3%. And you're not wrong. But what we need to understand is that even though mining uses this relatively small amount of water compared to other sectors, it has one of the largest polluting effects on our very limited natural water resources. An uncontrolled release of even a small volume of acid mine drainage can destroy large ecological areas. At the moment, around 350 megalitres per day of AMD is decanting out of the Feedwater area, with a similar amount being produced in Emalahleni. So to put this into perspective, the population of the city of Johannesburg consumes around 1,000 megalitres per day of water. So the volume of polluted A&D decanting daily just in the Witwatersrand area is equivalent to around 1/3 the volume of daily drinking water that is consumed in the entire city of Johannesburg. So let that sink in for a moment. Okay, so here I just want to take a step back so we can take a moment to understand the significance of the situation we find ourselves in. Although the BRICS countries, of which South Africa is a member, are considered water stressed, we collectively possess over 50% of the world's renewable water resources, with Russia and Brazil 80% each. However, South Africa's portion is that tiny sliver of yellow up in the middle. That's 0.1%. That's all we've got to work with. Now, the purpose of these graphs is to drive the point home that we as a country are seriously on the wrong side of the water stressed scale. And I'm afraid it only gets worse when added issues such as climate change, severe and widespread pollution, population growth, and natural water scarcity limit the volumes that are available for us to use. One of the most famous examples of this is Cape Town, the jewel in our tourism crown and capital city. It managed to get within a hair's breadth of day zero not too long ago. It was even mentioned in a recent BBC article of the top 11 cities of the world most likely to run out of drinking water. It only narrowly avoided reaching day zero by reactionary implementation of severe water restrictions, high water tariffs, heavy fines, and even threats of imprisonment. But in many smaller towns and settlements, day zero is already a stark reality, and in some cases has been for many, many years. So it seems that we all think most important factors for life, and we all think we know that it is a finite resource, but for some reason we don't act like we know. Global warming and population growth are making access to sufficient water even more of a challenge, but still we don't guard it and protect it like we do our gold and our diamonds. So there are some very scary statistics out there, and if you're not already concerned, then these should help. The United Nations is predicting a 40% global water shortfall by 2030. That's 10 years away, which is expected to affect more than 2 billion people. The world population is expected to increase to over 10 billion people by 2050. And in order to support this, agricultural production, the largest water user in the world, is going to need to expand by 70% over the same period. So it appears as though the human race has gotten ourselves into a bit of a bind. Basically, we need more land, more food, more water, more employment, just more. So what are we going to do? I think that's the trillion-dollar question we all want an answer to. And I think one part of that very complicated answer, I'll say again, is that we need to start being more future-focused. We need to manage and protect our environment with our gold and our diamonds, because they are infinitely more valuable. And when we talk about finding sustainable solutions to the challenges we face, the significance of the WEF nexus cannot be ignored. Essentially, it consists of 3 apexes, namely water, energy, and food. The security of these, with the addition of job security, are the 4 biggest challenges we face in modern day society, and in South Africa in particular. The WEF nexus clearly illustrates just how interrelated these factors all are, with a change in one directly affecting the others. Because of this interdependency, we need to look at finding integrated, sustainable solutions to solving the most immediate challenges of our people, not trying to solve problems in isolation. Integrated solutions fit firmly within the concept of the circular economy. The 3 R's, reduce, reuse, and recycle, is not a new one. It is starting to gain momentum globally and is spreading to all industries as we begin to realize that finite really means finite. Mintek believes in the underlying strategy of a circular economy, particularly within a mining context. Over the past few years, we have been developing an integrated system for mine water treatment. With a sustainable mine closure model in mind, we have identified reuse opportunities for the water we treat that may have a more sustainable outcome. And considering the water scarcity we face in this country, it should make sense to make wastewater treatment and reuse a priority. In terms of water treatment, the rule of thumb is that as water quality requirements increase, so do the costs of treatment and vice versa. There are, however, a number of activities such as agriculture and sanitation that are using large volumes of high quality water unnecessarily. You don't need drinking water to irrigate, and you definitely don't need it to flush your toilet, but we do. So why are we using such precious resources for these types of activities when fit for use quality will do? For instance, treating mine impacted water to irrigation quality instead of potable quality reduces CapEx and OpEx treatment costs by approximately 87 and 79% respectively. That's a massive savings to achieve while simultaneously freeing up a considerable alternative water resource. Currently, the two most common commercially available methods for treating AMD include high-density sludge precipitation and reverse osmosis. It's important to note here that the OpEx costs I've listed in this table do not necessarily include the cost of waste disposal or treatment, which is significant, and it's estimated to add around 10 to 15 Rand per cube to the overall operating costs. High-density sludge treats acid mine drainage via chemical precipitation. It is currently government's option of choice for treating the hundreds of megalitres of decant discharging out of the Feedwater region every day. However, a little known fact is that nearby limestone quarries are rapidly being depleted, which means that large quantities of limestone are being transported increasingly large distances, making this once cheap process far more expensive. It also produces tons of sludge that costs huge amounts of money to dispose of appropriately. And in terms of efficacy, it only neutralizes water and removes metals, but does not address the high sulphate levels, which are far above those allowed for discharge. Reverse osmosis is the other primary option of choice. It is a membrane method that produces potable water, but also produces significant volumes of brine waste that is a large and growing problem. Storage and treatment of the brines are an expensive issue, which adds to the already very high costs involved for this process. You can see that these are not sustainable solutions in any sense of the word. In South Africa, the fact that our AMD contains abnormally high levels of sulphate in the gram per litre levels with relatively low metal concentrations makes it a uniquely South African problem. Salinity levels, even after treatment with HDS, are still far too high, with sulphate concentrations often over 6 to 8 times higher than what is allowed for discharge. This is requiring dilution of the treated water with high quality water resources in order to meet discharge limits. So for the example I just mentioned, every megalitre of insufficiently treated AMD requires a further 6 to 8 megalitres of fresh water for diluting purposes. So we're effectively throwing good water after bad. And this dilution strategy may work in European countries that are water rich, but it's not working here. So we desperately need to identify and implement sustainable technologies that are appropriate within the South African context. So what are the alternatives? I'll focus on one here today. Biological sulfate reduction, or BSR, is a three-pronged approach to mine water treatment. It removes metals, increases pH, and removes sulfate to below limits required for safe discharge or reuse, and produces relatively small volumes. However, it has been previously precluded from implementation on any significant scale due to the high cost of substrate required to feed the bacteria involved. Since 2012, Mintek has been developing a BSR-based treatment technology for mine-impacted water that we have recently trademarked as the closure process. It is essentially a passive sulfate reduction process for the treatment of water after mine closure. Closure overcomes the obstacle of high substrate cost by utilizing waste products, including cow manure as the carbon source. It has been developed as a low-cost, low-maintenance technology for treating AMD, and is particularly suitable for treating small point sources in remote locations that lack services and infrastructure, such as mines after. Currently, proof of principle has been piloted at a local coal mine, treating 250 to 300 litres of AMD a day, and has been shown to produce water that is fit for use in irrigation. So, how does the closure process work? So the next few slides of mine are going to be a brief overview of the process, as my colleague Kerri will be delving into the intricacies in part 2 later this week. Closure essentially consists of a number of stages. Currently, reduction have a lower pH limit of around 5. The partially neutralized decant is then treated in further stages. Sulphate reduction and sulphate oxidation are two treatments, removing sulphates, metals, and further neutralizing the effluent. Stage 2 is primarily a polishing step to remove excess sulfide and any remaining metals of concern, while also providing an opportunity to recover biosulfur. And with a sustainable solution in mind, the end goal of the closure technology is to produce treated water that is fit for reuse in irrigated agriculture. This water can then potentially be used to produce commercially valuable products, including food, forage, cut flowers, and even energy crops. There's an added benefit again that biosulfur can be recovered, either as a fertilizer. Since closure makes use of waste products as a substrate, this substantially reduces the OpEx cost to a thin range of other commercially available methods, thereby overcoming the obstacle of high substrate costs. And importantly, as the processed byproducts are retained within the bed, the waste itself is not an immediate problem. Although metal sulfides and organic matter may build up over time, the metals contained within it can potentially be recovered using pyrolysis. So the question is, can the closure process be a sustainable South African alternative to current commercial methods? We think so, but it is just one option that we can include in our arsenal of sustainable solutions. So having addressed some of the environmental issues surrounding mine closure, I want to unpack the final part of the sustainability triple bottom line in more detail, particularly the economic aspects that I've touched on in a few of my previous slides. There are a number of options where treated wastewater can be reused, including within the sanitation sector and other industries such as manufacturing. However, government, the mining industry, and research organizations such as our own have chosen to focus primarily on agriculture as the target for reusing AMD. There are a number of reasons for this, some of which I've mentioned before, and others that I will speak about here. As I've illustrated in an earlier slide, agriculture is South Africa's largest water user, using up to 62% of our available high-quality water supply. Although this has reduced from 80% in the early 1990s, this is still clearly an unsustainable amount. The problem is that you only truly begin to understand why agriculture is so water-intensive when you understand the volumes required to produce agricultural products. For instance, to produce 1 kilogram of cereal grain requires 1,000 liters of water, while 1 kilogram of beef requires 43,000 liters. So it suddenly becomes easy to see why there's so much interest in this area. Just a small savings in water use in this sector could make a massive difference in terms of freeing up water supply for more critical uses. Irrigated agriculture also comes with a number of additional benefits, such as being twice as productive as rain-fed agriculture, using only 20% of agricultural land, but producing 40% of the world's food. It allows for the production of a variety of crops, including food, forage, flour, and energy crops for biofuels, again linking back to the WEF nexus I spoke about earlier. The use of AMD within agriculture also allows for the reduction in the health and environmental liabilities of the mines, while at the same time stimulating agriculture in the mining vicinity. But the greatest advantage of using treated AMD for crop irrigation is that it can act as a single financial initiative. So what exactly do I mean by that? Essentially, that the income generated from the sale of the produce can be used to fund the treatment of the water, and the miners, which may have lost their jobs due to mine closures, can be reskilled in the farming sector. All of which alleviates water, energy, food, and job security of the surrounding communities. An elegant solution to 4 of our biggest challenges. Although this idea has only recently begun to gain traction, work on this topic began in South Africa as far back as 1983. A team consisting of the Water Research Commission, in collaboration with the University of Pretoria, have shown not only that this is possible, but that it is a commercially viable option. They've illustrated through extensive research and data modeling that irrigating with gypsiferous mine water poses no serious effects on the groundwater, and that the produce is safe for consumption. This option is truly a viable and sustainable one, that needs to be given more attention and properly supported to make widespread implementation a reality. Fortunately, as I've mentioned, some of the bigger players in industry and government have taken notice of the opportunities that this type of creative solution can provide. And they are starting to see the importance of supporting projects that focuses on finding real sustainable solutions. The Green Engine is one of these, and is a project that is being promoted by the Mine Water Coordinating Body and driven by Anglo American. The idea is to promote local business activities and the creation of whole new industrial hubs in place of the mining economy once mining has ceased. Mine water treatment forms the heart of the Green Engine concept and is what Mintek has been focusing on during the development of our closure process. We are also planning on demonstrating the integration of the treatment technology with an irrigated agriculture in the next year or so. So we have finally come full circle, having addressed the three core needs of a sustainable solution. Now, I realize I've bombarded you all with lots of scary statistics and generous helpings of doom and gloom, but I also hope that I've succeeded in sowing a few seeds that may get you all thinking about mine closure strategies a little differently. Although the industry is facing numerous challenges, especially with current events unfolding around us, we need to remember there are just as many opportunities and so many good ideas that just need to be given enough of a chance to gain some real momentum. The results, I believe, will speak for themselves. Thank you all for your time today, and I invite you to register for part 2 of the story if you haven't already done so, which will be presented this Friday on the 8th of May.
Many thanks, Tamsyn, for the inspiring presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, Q&A time, please. Don't see any questions at this point. Okay, so we have the first question. Why only focusing on one technology when it is acknowledged that the fit for purpose concept may show different solutions as the best fit? And what would the maximum capacity, realistically speaking, of the presented technology, both HDS and RO, have proven to be viable for high flow rates? And this is from Raymond.
Okay. We're cutting out a little bit there, so I hope I've got the gist of the question. So from what I understand, the gist of the question is, why am I only focusing on closure?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, well, we're focusing on closure because we're looking at sustainable technologies. And I've tried to illustrate that the current technologies that are commercially available and are touted as the tried and tested methods are not the kind of the best options in all cases, and that they're not necessarily sustainable. Well, they're not sustainable, let's be fair. HDS, it works for very high flow rates, but like I've highlighted, it doesn't touch on the sulphate levels. So what's happening is that we've got enormous amounts of decant that is being treated by HDS. So we've got pH is being adjusted upwards and metals are being removed, but the sulphate levels are still incredibly high. And because of that, we are needing to dilute that treated water with fresh water to make it within levels required for discharge. So that's why we are looking at trying to find more sustainable options. And we're not saying that closure is going to be a direct competitor to HDS, because it's not. That's not where we've targeted closure to be. Closure is to target mines after closure, point source treatment, so smaller volumes. At the moment, we're envisioning treating about 50 megaliters a day. Kerri, you can come in here if you've got better info. But that's what we're kind of planning on going to with our new demonstration plant in the near future.
Yeah, I'll just add. Sorry, I'll just add that HDS and RO are viable for high flow rates, as you mentioned, and our technology is specifically targeting more remote locations, have as much infrastructure, much lower flows, as Tamsyn says, much lower megaliter volumes. So yeah, sorry, I'm just rereading your question. I hope that we answered it. It's a low-tech solution that's sort of fit for certain areas. And as Tamsyn mentioned, there needs to be a lot of different solutions in the arsenal, and this just happens to be the first one that we are focusing on.
Okay, many thanks for the comprehensive answer. And there's a follow-up question to that. How does the waste from the 3 processes differ? You mentioned potential resource. This is from Paul.
Okay, so the waste differ quite significantly. For high density sludge, for instance, you get tons and tons of sludge that needs to be disposed of. It's normally a metal hydroxide with high metal hydroxide content. With reverse osmosis, you've got significant volumes of brine. That is a very expensive problem that many people are working very hard to find a way to treat. With the closure process, it's primarily producing metal sulfides and biological waste. So we're envisioning that the waste itself is retained in the bed, and over time it may need to be removed to repack the bed if necessary. But we're envisioning that metal sulfide can be recovered by pyrolysis. So in fact, it may have value potential.
Okay, many thanks. And one more question from Raymond about the process. Is it similar to the passive sulphate treatment process tested by Golda in coal acid mine drainage about 10 years ago?
Kerri, do you know which one that is?
I think, Raymond, you might be referring to, yes, I think you might be referring to the bioneutralization plant with Anglo down in KwaZulu-Natal.
The MP process.
Yeah, I think it's the MP process, using a packed bed reactor, a degrading packed bed reactor. So yes, the underlying principle is the same. The design is slightly different, and the aim of producing irrigation quality water is also unique to our process. The MP process is for discharge to the local environment. What else can I say?
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so the underlying principle is the same.
Okay, many thanks for that answer. We have one question from Alina Hokaday. Has this includes pumping, etc., been considered in closure, also in the other treatment technologies? So this is linking two sectors are always difficult to achieve with more people involved. So any comments on that?
Okay, so we're going to be, so piping of water is not really an option, especially in a low-tech, low-cost treatment. So the idea is for the treated water to be used on site for rehabilitation of the mining area. For instance, in Mpumalanga, we've got some of the most arable land has been destroyed for coal mines. So if and when the coal mines close down, we have the possibility of rehabilitating those areas back to agricultural land. And if we use the treated water that it will be coming from the mine itself, after it has ceased operations, we can try and rehabilitate the actual mining area itself and produce a new economy for that area. So we're not planning on trucking the water or transferring the water large distances. The plan is to use it on site.
Okay, many thanks. We have another follow-up question. Brines about the waste streams. So the question is, but brines can contain lithium. So what analysis are available?
Well, we're not producing brines. So I think that might have been a miscommunication. Yeah, no, we don't produce brines at all in our process.
Okay, thanks. I have a question from Queen Reynolds. How well is the sulphate treatment biochemistry in closure understood? And do you think there is a scope for building mathematical and computational models of these complex processes to assist in plant design and optimization?
Yeah, Kerri, I think I'll let you answer this one.
Thanks, Gwen. I think theoretically it's quite well understood. I think that depending on the microbiology, each system might be a bit more unique, but the microbiology is highly complex, so it's quite difficult to narrow down exactly what's happening on in detail. But yes, we could do a high level overview, and I definitely think that we could model the different chemical processes again at a high level. And there's definitely scope to have a look at mathematical modeling for the physical characteristics of the reactors.
Okay, many thanks for that answer. One more question from Queen. I would imagine that the rest of the sub-Saharan Africa also has extreme water scarcity issues. Is closure a uniquely South African application due to the size of our mining activities, or do you think it would work to help water security across the wider region as well?
I definitely think wider ranges. I think one of the unique situations in Africa and water scarce areas, particularly that have mines that are highly sulfidic, is that you're going to produce a lot of acid mine drainage that has a lot of sulphate. And a lot of these treatment technologies require further dilution, which is not great when we don't have a lot of water going around. So sustainable solutions like this can definitely be an option, but we need to keep in mind what the target market for this is. It's point sources of treatment for mines as they close. So it's not intended to treat like enormous volumes like that's decanting out of the Witwatersrand region. It's specific point sources, and it could definitely be used throughout the world. It is concentrations that aren't high enough for us to actually take the time and effort and cost to recover.
Would it not be a next step to include the green idea coming?
I think, if I understand correctly, so we would love for these kinds of things to be included in legislation, and I think more and more they are becoming included, or at least becoming highlighted within the legislation, such as the MPRDA. The mining charter is pushing for it. The problem is that we need people who are not the change makers, who are the decision makers, to buy into these types of projects and these types of solutions so that they can include these things in the upcoming legislations. So that's the main issue, is we need to sell this to those people that can make the decisions.
Okay, many thanks for the comprehensive answer. One question from Kubashni Mari. Are the thresholds for the feed water? What are the thresholds for the feed water qualities? So, looking at low pH, high sulfates, and the plans to upscale the pilot plans, considering that a typical mine will decant in excess of 1 million liters per day. Sorry.
Okay, so basically the kinds of water that we're treating at the moment, the influence pH is around about 2 to 3. So we pre-neutralize that to around pH 5, which is basically the lower level where the microbes operate. The sulfate concentrations are extremely high. They're around anywhere from 3 to 4 grams per liter that we've successfully treated. And we can remove upwards of 98, 99% of the sulfate. So we can reduce it down to almost, well, way below discharge limits, around 200 milligrams per liter of sulfate. we are planning on upscaling the process. We will talk about that a lot more in Kerri's presentation on Friday. So if you want to hear more about that, then please register.
Okay, I don't see any further questions from the panel or from the team. Of course, there are many congratulatory messages for the excellent presentation. So much appreciated from the team.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so on that note, then we'll meet again.